Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leffridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leffridge, and I would like to welcome you to the Shade Chronicles.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and I also want to welcome you and thank you for spending your time with us. Pirates of Luna by Lawrence Trokey. The cargo ship was on time to its destination at the Lunar Orbital Supply Station in a couple of hours. Rafe glanced over the monitors to make sure everything was good and then looked out the large cockpit screen at the moon, which just about filled the entire view. It was quite a sight to see the moon up close with all the details of craters, valleys, scars, and so on. This was his first trip as a cargo ship attendant, so he was excited about being in space for such an extended period of time. Normally back home, he would get a few hours here and there working supply runs to the Earth orbiting stations, but his desire was to go to the moon like a real astronaut, like the heroes from centuries past, the explorers who took the trip in amazingly simple ships, who were risking their lives like someone on Earth crossing the ocean on a raft. He sat in the pilot's chair on the helm of the ship, but both of those names were misnomers. The cargo ship flew itself, basically. The onboard artificial intelligence took care of all the details of flight and made sure every system was operating normal. Rafe was there as a human intervention agent, which meant if something needed fixing that could not be handled by the AI's automation, then he would take care of the problem. The rest of the time, he was basically a passenger with not much to do. If the shipping company could get rid of the human aspect of the business, they would do so in a heartbeat. It was expensive to maintain a habitable space on the cargo ships and pay human workers wages plus benefits. However, space travel was still a very complicated endeavor, so it was necessary, at least for the time being. Rafe picked up an old acoustic guitar he had secured on a stand and began playing softly. He had hoped there would be more to do on this trip, but he was still excited about going to the moon, even though he was just along for the ride. After a few minutes of playing, the ship's AI, named Aiden for Autonomous Intelligent Digitally Engineered Network, said, "I like the way that sounds, Rafe. You really are getting better." Rafe rolled his eyes at the comment. The AI was encouraged to interact with the human attendant for multiple reasons, including it helped the AI improve its relationships with humans. It also allowed the AI to evaluate the mental stability of the human on board to make sure its systems were operating normally too. Rafe was not a fan of talking to computers, but he knew he needed to be polite and not ignore Aiden's attempts at making conversation. "Thanks," was the best he could offer in response. "Rafe, I'm detecting a small coolant leak in the starboard cargo base section 4. It is nothing serious, but it should be addressed before we attempt docking at the Lunar Orbital Distribution Station. Would you mind taking a look at it?" "Sure," Rafe said as he secured his guitar on its stand. He was happy to have something to do. He unlatched his safety harness and instantly began floating away from the chair. He spun in the zero gravity towards the starboard passageway access door. With a little push off the pilot's chair, he glided through the cabin towards the door. It opened just as he approached, and he floated through to the passageway. Detecting his presence, lights flashed on to illuminate the passageway section Rafe glided through. The passageway was a long tunnel-like tube running the length of the cargo section of the ship and ending at the engine room in the stern of the ship. There was one on either side of the ship, both starboard and port sides. The engine room, which allowed access to the controls for the ship's propulsion, was a cabin connecting to both passageways. Periodically, Rafe had to pass through airlock doors, which made it possible to secure a section of the ship should it have a hull breach. Both the starboard and port side passageways had a series of portholes facing the cargo containers, which allowed for visual inspection. There were a few portholes on the outside bulkheads as well, which gave Rafe a view of the dark void they traveled in. Rafe thought the design of the cargo ship reminded him of the trains on Earth a century ago or more. The ship's helm would have been the engine or locomotive part of the train. The next part was a series of cargo compartments assembled in space in any order necessary. The containers themselves were strapped to reusable rockets on Earth and shot into space. Once in orbit, they were then connected to the cargo ships. This was the kind of work Rafe had done before getting the job of being a human attendant on a cargo ship. He would help arrange the containers arriving in orbit and assemble them for transport on a cargo ship headed for the moon or the asteroid belt just past the orbit of Mars. Aiden chimed in again along Rafe's path. "I have really enjoyed working with you, Rafe." The voice came from the monitor screen that was one of many periodically stationed along the passageway. It was how Aiden traveled around the ship and could monitor things with something other than sensors. The screens were Aiden's eyes, ears, and mouth, essentially. Somewhat annoyed at the obvious surveillance being conducted by the AI to make sure Rafe did his job right, Rafe's response was limited. "Thanks again." "I feel like we really bonded on this mission, don't you?" Aiden's tone was a little needy, Rafe thought. "I think we both performed within expected parameters, meeting key metrics, while maintaining a pleasant working relationship." Rafe was being sarcastic with Aiden, trying to sound very logical and computer-like. "You are funny, Rafe. I also like your wry wit. It can be challenging at times, but I think I'm finally catching on. I will miss it." The comment caught Rafe a little out of step. For a moment, it sounded like Aiden assumed they would not be working together again. Rafe didn't think he did anything to prevent him from returning as a human intervention agent. Rafe wondered if he did anything to upset Aiden. Aiden, if I said anything to offend you, well, I was only kidding around, you know. Just trying to bond with you in a typical human male way, like the way young men like to test and tease each other." Rafe was hoping his explanation would smooth out any issues with his interactions with the AI. He knew he could come off as distant and irritated at having to work with AI personas, so he wanted to dial down any hard feelings he thought Aiden might have. Aiden responded by laughing hard. The sound of it reverberated through the passageway. Rafe thought it was an overreaction at best and awkward to say the least. Aiden's emotional intelligence was still a work in progress, apparently. Aiden must have sensed the faux pas because it had tried to explain its behavior. "Oh, I have no problem with you at all, Rafe. You are the best human intervention agent I've worked with so far. I am very happy with our relationship and feel we complement each other in the working environment." Rafe slowed his glide through the passageway as he listened to Aiden's odd explanation. He started to feel something was off with Aiden. "Aiden? When was the last time you ran a self-diagnostic?" Rafe didn't get a response immediately, and that worried him. "Aiden, did you hear me?" "I have just completed a self-diagnostic and all systems are operating within expected parameters." Aiden's reply seemed a little stiff, like it resented being asked to run a self-diagnostic. The fact that it was lying to him never crossed Rafe's mind. Rafe thought about running a manual diagnostic on Aiden when he noticed a warning message on his wrist monitor screen. It was a small screen built into his flight suit on the left wrist section, just above the junction point for securing the suit's gloves. The warning flashed a proximity alert, which meant something was on an intercept course to the cargo ship. He was surprised Aiden did not mention the approaching object. "Aiden, I show an object closing on the cargo ship's location according to sensors. Are you picking that up?" Rafe glanced out one of the portholes in the bulkhead to see if he could get a visual of the unknown object. "That's not your concern, Rafe. I am aware of the object and analyzed its trajectory. It will not be a problem." Again, Aiden's response was not right. Any potential collision from an approaching object should be taken seriously by the ship's AI. There were procedures in place that were supposed to be engaged until it's determined conclusively whether or not the threat is real. Successful space travel was all about taking rigorous precautions to ensure the safety of the crew and cargo. Aiden's response didn't line up with what Rafe knew was right. "Rafe, I really need you to lock down the coolant link so we can dock with the Lunar Orbital Station. Would you please focus on the task at hand?" "Aiden, we need to start collision procedures in case there's a problem with the object intercepting us. I'm heading back to the helm to start." Rafe had had enough of Aiden's illogical insistence they were in no danger. "I will not let you return to the helm until the coolant leak is repaired." Aiden's ultimatum was followed by the airlock door shutting, cutting Rafe off from the helm. "You can't be serious." Rafe was getting pissed at Aiden's ridiculous behavior. At the moment, though, it didn't appear he had much of a choice. He would fix the leak, and then when he got back to the helm, he would pull the plug on Aiden's higher functions by triggering the AI's kill switch. It was a safety requirement for any AI persona working with humans. It prevented a malfunctioning or hacked system from causing problems and potentially costing lives and precious company property. All right, Aiden, you win. Where the hell's the leak? It is in Section 12B below the central distribution panel. Aiden's tone did not change or indicate it was upset with Rafe's attitude. Rafe was reaching for the access panel when he saw the bomb. It was right below the panel, tucked back against the bulkhead. He glided to the panel and laid both hands on either side of it to steady himself. He wasn't sure what to do next, and he didn't know how much time he had before the damn thing went off. One thing was for sure. Aiden wanted him to be near the bomb when it exploded to take him out. He had never heard of an AI killing someone before, but he knew it was possible. Just because the persona was artificial didn't mean it was immune to emotional responses and motivations. Just like humans, AI personas could show hate and fear in the right circumstances. Then something caught his attention outside of the porthole on the bulkhead. He realized the approaching object was a ship, a transport ship to be exact, and when he saw it, he knew what was going on. He had seen reports of rogue lunar surface workers who abandoned their posts and stole company equipment and supplies. They conducted raids on cargo ships from their secret base somewhere on the dark side of the moon. The incidents were few and far between, but they were also on the rise lately. Rafe figured this was one of those ships, and somehow they got Aiden to cooperate with their plans to steal the cargo and probably the ship too. That meant Rafe had to be dealt with, otherwise he'd be able to identify the thieves to authorities and help catch them. How and when the bomb was planted was still a mystery, but Rafe had no time to dwell on it. Rafe, we are running out of time. Please repair the coolant leak. Aiden started to sound anxious, like the coolant leak was part of the plan to let these pirates, for lack of a better word, take the ship. Maybe they bribed Aiden or found a way to hack his system. He realized it didn't matter. He had to find a way to stop this from happening. The company would crucify him for letting thieves steal the ship. He would never work in space again. Rafe unlatched the panel's cover. Then he spun around and launched himself at Aiden's monitor, still holding the panel cover. He slammed the cover into the monitor, causing it to shatter violently, glass spraying the area and then left to float around him like tiny diamonds. Rafe hoped this would blind Aiden from what he was about to do next and buy him some time. The bomb was a small one, Rafe realized, just the right size to blow a hole in the bulkhead, giving access to the ship to the pirates. Rafe just needed to get into an environmental suit which would protect him from the vacuum of space when the bomb exploded. There were emergency suits placed in every section of the passageway. Rafe propelled himself as fast as he could to get to the locker and put on the spacesuit. He clicked the helmet down onto the collar of his flight suit and immediately felt the suit's environmental systems dispersing air into his face. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the flash of the bomb exploding. He grabbed a nearby conduit with his left hand just before the air in the passageway was violently sucked into space, nearly taking him with it. When all the air had escaped, Rafe looked for a place to hide, although the passageway did not have much to offer. The best he could do was get behind a column of bundled conduit near the opening in the hull. The lighting in the section of the passageway was damaged in the explosion, so it was mostly dark with the occasional flicker from a dying light fixture. Rafe saw someone coming toward the hole in the bulkhead. The lights on their helmet illuminated the space right inside the passageway. Looking for anything he could use as a weapon, Rafe grabbed a broken piece of conduit that was long enough to be used like a club or a short spear. The intruder entered the hole in the bulkhead cautiously and scanned the passageway. There was quite a bit of debris floating around, and he had trouble seeing through it. He waved a hand in front of him to try to push some of the particles aside for a better view. From Rafe's hiding place, he saw the space-modified pistol in the intruder's right hand. Rafe decided it was now or never. He swung the conduit as hard as he could down on the man's hand holding the pistol. The impact caused the gun to come loose and spin off down the passageway. Rafe's attack also pushed the intruder back through the hole into space. Not looking to see what happened to the pirate, Rafe used the bulkhead as a launch point to propel himself down the passageway in the direction of the pistol. He caught up to it right at the airlock. Even though Aiden had shut down the airlock door, cutting him off from the helm, the door at the other end of the damaged section of passageway might only be closed due to the hull breach. Rafe looked for the manual override panel, opened it, and pulled the release lever to open the airlock. He quickly moved aside and grabbed onto a piece of bulkhead as air escaped from the section of the passageway just opened. When all the air had evacuated, he swung himself into the next section of passageway, closed the airlock behind him, and then repressurized the section of passageway. Next, he launched himself as fast as he could towards the next airlock door, hoping Aiden did not lock it already. To get to the helm now, he would have to travel the rest of the length of the starboard passageway to the engine room at the end of the cargo ship. Passing through it to the port side passageway, he would then have to make it all the way through the port passageway to get back to the bow of the ship and to the helm. All of this was provided Aiden did not try to stop him along the way. The intruder used his onboard propellant to slow his trajectory out of the cargo ship and into the void. When he righted himself, he saw his colleagues, Chen and Nickel, exiting the transport ship and spacewalking towards the cargo ship's hull breach. Over the comms, Nickel asked, "What the hell happened in there, Jonesy?" Jonesy replied rather disgustedly, "That kid was in there waiting for me. He ambushed me and took my gun. Then he pushed me out here." Nickel was aggravated. "Aiden, can you read me? Over. I thought you were supposed to take care of the human attendant for us. What the hell happened?" Aiden replied over their comms, "I did lower Rafe into the section with the bomb, but he must have realized what was going on and took measures to counteract our plans. I am sorry." Nickel spat back, "Not as sorry as you're gonna be if you don't keep up your end of this deal. There'll be no freedom for you. You'll be working as a fucking toaster in a cafeteria mess if this deal goes sideways. Do you copy that?" Aiden was stunned by the threat, but he knew Nickel was serious. "Of course, I understand, and I am tracking Rafe now. I will lock him in the engine room for you until you have a chance to deal with him. Then the ship is yours." Rafe got to the engine room and tried to use the communication station there to contact the Lunar Orbital Distribution Station for help. Aiden had shut down the ship's communications, so it was no use. The only thing for Rafe to do now was to get to the helm and take control. It was then he realized Aiden had locked the port side passageway entrance, trapping him in the engine room. With few choices left, Rafe considered his options. All the ship's navigation and propulsion systems were under Aiden's control, so he couldn't use the controls in the engine room to pilot the ship away from the pirates. He could, however, trigger the engine's oxidizer to overload, causing the propulsion system to kick in and thereby sending the cargo ship into motion. It meant destroying the engine, but the thrust would push the ship away from the pirates towards the moon. The moon's gravity would further aid in the ship's movement, and when the Lunar Orbital Distribution Station noticed the ship out of control, they would send a crew to recover the ship before it crashed into the moon's surface. Theoretically, anyway. Not the best of options, but at least it would take some control away from Aiden. The other option, equally problematic, was to spacewalk on the exterior of the cargo ship to the hatch located at the helm of the ship. He would need to manually open the hatch to enter the helm and take control. Problem was his emergency environmental suit did not have a propulsion system, since it really wasn't supposed to be used for spacewalks. That meant he had to make sure nothing he did caused him to lose contact with the ship, otherwise he would drift off into space. His wrist monitor flashed a message saying that someone was approaching the engine room from the starboard passageway. The pirates must have boarded the ship again and were coming for him. He needed to act now if there was any hope of surviving this mess. He found the valve to release more fuel into the oxidizer chamber and twisted it to wide open. He heard the gas push through the pipes and he knew he only had a few seconds before it overloaded. He pushed himself to the hatch in the ceiling of the engine room and opened it. Again, precious air flushed out into the vacuum. He waited until it was all gone and then he exited the engine room into the blackness of space. He closed the hatch behind him and then scanned the path laid out before him. Rafe was located at the end of the cargo ship. The only part of the ship left behind him was the engine. In front of him, several hundred meters of cargo containers before he would reach the helm of the ship. Any misstep or mistake, and he would float off to his death, so he had to take his time and choose his path carefully. Just then, the overload triggered in the oxidizer, causing an explosion that blasted propellant through the now damaged rocket nozzles of the engine. Rafe felt the ship lunge as he nearly lost his grip on the surface. He slid across the exterior several meters until his hand lashed onto a pipe running across his trajectory. He held fast for several moments, regaining his composure and clamping down on his fear. He saw the stars move around him as the cargo ship rushed forward, a result of the violent push of escaping propellant. "What did you do, Rafe?" Aiden's voice came over the comm system in Rafe's flight suit. It sounded worried, Rafe thought. That made him smile. Rafe carefully crossed over from the engine room structure to the first cargo container. He used the conduits and pipes that ran the length of the cargo section for handholds for his spacewalk. His boots were not magnetic, so he had to do most of the work with his hands to move himself along the ship. He got about 2/3 of the way across the cargo section when he noticed the pirates' transport ship in pursuit of the cargo ship. They were really burning propellant to catch up, and it was working. He looked around the area where he thought the lunar orbital distribution station was located to see if they were close enough to get a visual on the cargo ship. Unfortunately, it was still some distance away. Maybe in a few minutes, someone on the station would notice the trajectory of the cargo ship was off and started to figure out something was wrong. Rafe didn't know if there was enough time for the rescue he hoped for, judging by how fast the pirate transport was gaining on the cargo ship. He continued his walk in earnest. By the time he was 2 cargo containers away from the helm, the pirate's transport ship was nearing the engine of the cargo ship. He watched them approach. He noticed one of the pirates was exiting the transport and propelling himself in his direction. He saw a flash and realized the pirate had shot a gun at him. Before he could react, he saw the bullet explode against the conduit he was holding, spreading bullet fragments in all directions along with pieces of conduit. It must have been a .50 caliber round fired at him from the amount of damage it had done. Rafe was out of options. He could try fighting back with the gun he took off the pirate earlier, but he knew there were problems with that plan. The recoil from the gun would almost certainly push him off the surface of the cargo ship, sending him into space. He could try moving faster towards the helm, but that also meant the possibility of miscalculating a move, sending him off into space. He could try to take cover and hide, but the pirate or the transport ship would eventually reach his position, and then he would be caught. An explosion by his right foot caused him to jump before he could get a handhold. It was too late. He was spinning off the exterior of the cargo container into the void. The shrapnel must have torn a small hole in his environmental suit because warnings were going off in his headset about an environmental system breach. The tear had to be around his foot or ankle. He tried to see it, but the spinning made it hard for him to focus. Besides, he was busy panicking about drifting off into space as well. Over the pirate's comm, Nickel told Chen, "Good shot. It looks like he got him. Now get back here and let's get the cargo ship back under control before the guys at the lunar station figure out there's a problem." Aiden chimed in over the pirate's comm system. "Rafe destroyed the main engine, but I've been using maneuvering thrusters to stabilize our course. They don't have enough power to slow our momentum, though." Nickel responded, "We'll hook the transport up to the stern of the cargo ship and slow your momentum. It'll take a few minutes, but once we stop its momentum, then we'll start towing your ship to our base. You will need to cover us while we're working to keep the lunar station from getting suspicious. Do you copy that, Aiden?" Aiden replied affirmatively and waited for further instructions from Nickel. Rafe tried to get control of his breathing. His suit notified him his environmental systems were now down to 60% and falling. Anything below 30% and he could black out from the lack of breathable air. His spinning also complicated things, so he tried not to let it distract him. He reached into a utility pocket on the leg of his suit and found an emergency patch for just such an occasion as a suit breach. He brought his right foot up and held it with his left hand while positioning the patch over the tear in the ankle section of his boot. The escaping gases triggered an adhesive on the patch that allowed him to stick it to his wounded boot. His suit notified him the environmental system was stabilizing, and he heaved a sigh of relief. He now needed to figure out how to avoid floating helplessly away in space forever. His comm signal was too weak to reach the lunar station, and Aiden would probably jam his signal anyway to prevent him from warning them. He would eventually be picked up by the moon's gravity and brought into orbit. However, he calculated he would not be within range of the station even at the closest point in orbit where he would pass the station's location, so that would not do him any good either. Eventually, his environmental suit would fail, and he would die in orbit. His suit did not have a transponder either, like the Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or EMU suits, used for spacewalks to locate someone in his position. He twisted his body to be facing the cargo ship receding in the distance. Its momentum had stopped, and it looked like the pirates were hooking up a tow line to the stern of the ship. Rafe remembered the pistol he had tucked away in a pocket of his suit. When the cargo ship stopped, he could use the gun to propel himself to its location if he could get the trajectory right. He didn't know how long he had before the pirates towed the ship away, so he needed to move fast. With gun in hand, he loaded around into the chamber. He extended his right hand in the opposite direction of the cargo ship and waited till his body spun himself into the right position. He fired the gun and felt the recoil push him in the opposite direction of the bullet. He turned to look at the cargo ship and tried to judge how fast he was moving towards it. Unfortunately, not fast enough. So he did the maneuver again, hoping to pick up speed with the next firing. He had to fire the gun several times to pick up enough velocity to have a shot at reaching the cargo ship before the pirates towed it away. By the time he was finished, he had only one bullet left in the clip. He put the gun away and decided to worry about that later, since now he had to figure out how to grab the cargo ship and not bounce off of it back into space. It took him several minutes to close the distance on the ship. Just as he was about 50 meters away from the center section of the cargo ship, he noticed the ship started moving. The pirates must have finished rigging the tow line and were now pulling the ship away. The cargo ship was now passing him like he was standing at a bus stop watching his bus pull away. At 25 meters, his intercept point was now closing in on the last third of the ship. Aiden's voice chimed in over Rafe's comm. "I see you survived after all, Rafe. I always thought you were very resourceful. However, you really should surrender and not interfere with this operation. You have no chance of stopping it." Rafe replied, "I'm kind of busy right now, Aiden. I'll have to get back to you." Rafe turned off his comm system and focused on making contact with the ship. The last 5 meters were the most stressful. The helm was coming up fast and he needed to latch on before it slipped past him. He extended his arms and hands, looking desperately for a handhold anywhere nearby. Because the ship was moving away from him, it actually slowed things down for him enough to locate a handhold just as the ship was about to pull away from him. He grabbed onto it and held onto it with all the strength he possessed. Again, taking a second to steady himself, he then looked for more handholds to take him to the hatch for the helm. The first two were close, but the next one he had to launch himself into a slow glide over several meters, being so careful as to not accidentally bump the surface of the ship and send him out into space again. Finally, he reached the goddamn hatch. He held on to a piece of piping with his left hand while he removed the panel to the manual hatch override controls. Just as he was about to pull the lever to open the hatch, a shadow passed over him, and he realized a pirate had snuck up on him. He glanced over his shoulder to see the pirate leveling a gun at his helmet. Without thinking, he pulled the lever and the hatch opened. A blast of escaping air slammed into the pirate and sent him tumbling away into space. Rafe didn't wait to see if the pirate used his navigation thrusters to correct his course. He pulled himself into the helm control room. Once inside, Rafe pressurized the cabin and removed his helmet. He knew Aiden would be able to talk to him again, maybe try to convince him not to disable it. It didn't matter. He was taking control of the ship whether Aiden cared or not. Aiden's voice came over the main monitor. "You don't have to do this, Rafe. I can help you save the ship if you let me. If you disable me, you will be on your own to stop them. Your chances of success are quite low and they will kill you. Let me help you and you will live. I'm done trusting you, Aiden. You proved to me who you really are. Goodbye." Just as Rafe was reaching for the panel to access the kill switch for the AI's higher functions, the door to the helm opened. Nickel stepped in with a gun raised and pointed at Rafe. "You can stop right there, kid. Back away from the panel. Have a seat." Nickel motioned with the gun for Rafe to sit in the pilot's chair. Rafe did as ordered, spinning the chair away from the cockpit screen to face Nickel. Nickel stood between Rafe and the kill switch panel. He leaned casually against the bulkhead and smiled at Rafe. "Boy, you're a goddamn nuisance." He followed that with a laugh. "You made poor Chen shit his pants back when you blasted him off into space. He'd be in here slitting your throat right now if he wasn't so embarrassed." Nickel laughed again. Rafe didn't find any of it funny. "So this is the part where you kill me and throw me into space, right?" Rafe asked, dreading to hear the answer. No. While you gave us a hell of a time to get the job done, we did get what we wanted in the end." He paused and then said, "You know, things aren't going to go too well for you once this is over. When you go back to the corporation, they're going to hang you from the highest tree for losing a cargo ship and its shipment. You won't work in space again, and you'll be on the hook for millions of dollars even after the insurance money's paid. Maybe you should kill me," Rafe said gloomily. Nickel chuckled again. "I got a better idea. You're a pretty capable guy. It's hard to find experienced and resourceful people to work with out here. You see what I have to work with now. I could use an upgrade in personnel." Aiden interrupted. "Nickel, you can't be serious. You can't trust him. He tried to stop you from taking the ship. He tried to kill me. Nickel reached over, opened the panel, and hit the AI kill switch. Aiden's voice faded away, and the AI monitor went dark. Nickel looked back at Rafe. So how about it? You want a job, kid?